I do a lot of hiking and mountain biking in the woods. Nothing has ever made me not want to go back, but there has been some weird and scary shit. First off, when you go off into the woods a lot, you find all kinds of weird things. Altars, teepees, shrines. Some of it can be pretty creepy. I think most of it, though, is just built by bored people who are trying to freak people out who go into the woods. And that makes it a bit less scary to me. Among the strangest of these I've seen are a large clearing of trees with all but one entrance blocked off by webs of red strings, and a giant stone pentagram 30 feet in diameter stretched across the clearing, a wooden tunnel leading to a small room containing defaced religious icons. And one time when I stumbled upon dozens if not hundreds of creepy Polaroid pictures hanging from the ceiling of a building out in the woods. I remember a lot of them being close-up face shots of girls sleeping, a dude brushing his teeth taken from outside a window, and a photo booth strip of two girls where one of their faces was crossed out with the words, "I'm glad you're dead." What's a lot scarier to me though is stuff that isn't meant to be creepy like the aforementioned things hopefully were. Like one time I heard a distant panicked scream followed by a crashing and thudding sound. I could never tell from which direction it came, and I never heard anything else after, so I really had no idea what it was. I think the creepiest of all these things I've experienced was one time while I was walking home from school through the woods. I could hear people talking off in the distance. I couldn't quite hear what they were saying, but they seemed to be fiercely arguing. They were very quiet for a minute, and then I heard them once again, really close now. The forest was really dense in this area, so although they sounded maybe 15 to 20 feet away, I couldn't see them or pinpoint where they were exactly. This time, they were close enough to hear what they were saying though. "It's fucked up you guys always make me... Shh, someone's coming! Ah shit, hurry!" Then I could hear a bunch of rustling noises. I came around a corner expecting to see these people who were talking, but I couldn't see anyone there. I kept on walking, cautious and trying to be aware of my surroundings. About 10 feet past the corner, I saw something to the left of the trail, close to where the voices were coming from. It immediately caught my eye. I could see a big bundle of something wrapped up in this huge tarp. It wasn't completely wrapped up, so you could kind of see into it. I couldn't really tell exactly what I was seeing though. I really wanted to see what this was. I scanned the forest all around me and behind the tarp, making sure nobody was there watching, and then I took a step towards it. Suddenly, I could hear a click from behind me. "Keep walking," the voice said very calmly. I looked back into the forest, but I couldn't see anyone there. "Go, now!" I looked over for another second, still unable to see a single soul. Then I turned around and kept on walking like nothing ever happened. I don't know what was going on there, but that whole thing gave me the creepiest vibes I've ever felt out in the woods. This happened just a couple of months ago. So I moved from New Zealand to Germany about 3 years ago now. I was working at a hotel in Munich as a bar manager while I've been learning the language. It's ridiculously complicated, especially if English is your only language before trying to learn. Anyway, so you get the picture and can imagine I'm a 27-year-old blonde who's kind of a punky-looking girl. It was a 2-minute walk from my hotel to the train station. I had to catch the train to my hometown after I finished work on most nights. It was common for me to get harassed at the train station or on the way there, even though it was only a 2-minute walk. I guess I was just an extra easy target because I couldn't really speak German very well. Once, I had a guy ask to marry him for money. Another one asked me why I didn't speak his language because he wanted me to come home with him. And another one called me a slut because I walked past him. You know, all the standard stuff. The scariest time, though, was when I actually arrived in my hometown. You see, I live about 35 kilometers away from the city center. I head home on the train as usual. I got off and began to walk around the corner to my apartment. This was somewhere around midnight on a Monday, by the way. I got to my apartment and started to unlock my door, but as I did so, suddenly I felt someone tap me from behind on my shoulder. I turned around and saw a man standing right behind me. He was quite short and Middle Eastern, but he seemed a friendly enough looking guy. I was obviously shocked by him touching me so suddenly though, so my immediate response was to assume he lived in the building. I asked if I could help the man with something. It was just so weird. That was the very first thing I could think to say. The man said in German, "I need your number." Again, I was shocked because I assumed he already lived there and had just gotten locked out of his house or something. He then began to tell me a story about how he had followed me all the way home from Munich and needed my number right now. I told him no and that I was married. My husband was literally just inside the apartment. He followed up very quickly with a, "That doesn't matter to me," and told me he was going to come inside. Of course, I began to freak out and stated I would be going inside by myself. As I entered the apartment and tried to shut the door behind me, the man shoved me forward and tried to force his way inside. Luckily, I managed to turn around and slam the door so hard in his face it brought tears to my eyes. The creep continued to stand outside for minutes. I could see him through the peephole just waiting there for me. By the time I told my husband about this, he had already left. It all happened so fast, I didn't even manage to call the police. I was too bewildered to do it right away. The thing that scares me, though, is that this situation could have been much worse. If my husband wasn't there, well, his daughter lived there too. I keep thinking of all these things that could have happened to us, and it still gives me nightmares. If I didn't manage to shut the door in time, or if I lived all alone by myself. Nowadays, I carry pepper spray and a whistle everywhere I go, just to make sure I can be completely safe. This story takes place during my senior year of high school, when I still lived at home with my mother. It was a Saturday, so I slept in as any teenager is wont to do. My mom left for work early that morning, so I had spent the entire day home alone pretty much. I decided to do some cleaning around the house to at least help out when I realized we were out of paper towels. I went down to the garage to go fetch some more, since that's where we kept all of our extra supplies. My mom lives in a 3-story townhome, where the main floor is on the second floor, and the first floor is just a small entryway at the bottom of the stairs and 2 doors. One is the front door, and the other leads into the garage. I walked down the stairs and opened the door to the garage, going to flip on the lights. I realized, though, that I didn't really need to. It seemed the garage door was wide open and letting in quite a lot of daylight. Maybe to some this would be no big deal, but my mom lives in a not-so-great part of town. She was always adamant about closing the garage door whenever she would leave. Because of this, I remember feeling really weird about saying this, since it was very unusual for her to forget to close the door. I just chalked it up, though, to my mom not realizing it, or perhaps something rolling under the door so the automatic sensor kept it from closing completely, and she'd just driven away without realizing. I tried to put it to the back of my mind and looked over into the dark corner of the garage where the boxes were all stacked and the paper towels were neatly stored. For some reason, though, I couldn't bring myself to walk over there and grab them. I did have a slight fear of the dark, so I figured that must be causing my sudden hesitation. I just stood there in the doorway and pressed the garage door button on the wall. I watched it close very slowly until it was completely shut. I made sure nothing blocked it from closing this time, and waited a good 10 seconds before leaving to make sure it was fully shut. I switched off the light and walked back inside. I locked the door to the garage as well. I had only taken maybe 2 steps up the stairs before I could hear boxes tumbling, the scuffling of feet, and the audible sound of someone hitting their hand against the garage door opener. Then the mechanical sound of the garage door opening. Immediately, I noped it up the rest of the flight of stairs, then stood at the top step for what must have been 20 minutes just shaking. It wasn't until my mom got home, asking me why the garage door was open, that I finally went back down. Other than my mom's car now in the garage, it was completely empty, except for all of the boxes in the corner where we stored the extra things for the house. I looked over and saw they had all been toppled over. Someone had been hiding there. I had to explain to my mom the situation. Needless to say, I'm extremely glad my gut told me not to go into that dark corner of my garage and just walk right into the arms of whoever was deciding to wait there. Who knows what they wanted to do to me? So, this isn't my story, but my great aunt's instead. I'll call her Sophie for privacy's sake. So, Sophie had been married for about 30 years to a man who we'll call Jake. At this point, they were both in their 50s and had 2 sons together. Jake convinced Sophie to move across the country, even though she didn't really want to. She only had her family in the Midwest, you see, and he was asking her to move all the way to California. She agreed though, after Jake said he promised to support her. Sophie came to find out that Jake had been cheating on her for about 27 years, all with different men and women as well. She was extremely heartbroken and moved out to live with her sister. We later found out that Jake had quite a few mental illnesses. He was a pathological liar, bipolar, and had severe narcissism as well. He was also schizophrenic. I'm not sure if it was paranoid schizophrenia or some other type though. One day, a couple of months after moving out, Sophie suddenly got a call from her son, who had been keeping a close eye on his father. Someone had to make sure he took his meds for his mental illnesses after all. Her son seemed to be very distressed, and he started telling her the story of what happened. Jake had gone completely off his meds and started hallucinating. Apparently, he saw a strange man in his garage. Well, Jake believed this hallucination was a real intruder, so he grabbed a chainsaw. I'm not entirely sure how this happened, but this is what the doctors managed to get out of Jake after the incident. Jake's brain had gone so completely haywire that it convinced him that he was the intruder, as in his own body was that of the intruding force. So Jake revved up his chainsaw and took it to his own body. He sawed off his left leg entirely. Then he started to brandish the chainsaw at everyone else, before finally taking it to his own neck and face. He seemed to be trying to cut off his own head. Thankfully, he only managed to mess up his lower jaw before he passed out. His son found him in a huge pool of blood and flesh that was severed from him. Of course, he called 911 immediately. Once at the hospital, he called Sophie. She instantly flew out to meet him and give support. I know this is not your typical creepy story, but it was quite terrifying to everyone in my family. They were not able to save Jake's leg in the end, so it had to be properly disposed of. He was in a coma for a couple of days, during which the doctors were unsure if he would ever wake up. My aunt stayed by his bedside. She was still upset at him, of course, for lying and cheating, but she knew this was the father of her children, and even if he wasn't the greatest person, her kids would be devastated if he died like this. Honestly, I'm still stunned by my Aunt Sophie, who went back to support this man who cheated on her and made sure he was healthy. She's the sort who looks like a cute little old lady, but she's a total badass. She stayed by his side, even though he looked and acted like something out of a horror movie, with his bandaged, mangled jaw and stump of a leg, lashing out at everyone. She didn't cry or show disgust when his bandages were changed. She just dealt with and returned home after a few weeks. I remember going to lunch with her once. My father and I had done our best to avoid bringing it up altogether, but somehow it still managed to come up. She didn't even flinch. Jake recovered, and I'm pretty sure he's getting the psychological help he needs now. My aunt is doing good as well. She maintains civil contact with him, but just to make sure he's taking care of himself and being good to the kids. Pretty damn civil of her if you ask me. If it were me, I don't think I could stand to hear his voice after all the lies, deceit, and craziness. She's also dating now, so I hope some guy realizes just how awesome she is and gets her a ring real quick. I was homeless in Long Beach, California in 1980, at 16 years old. My mom was in federal prison, you see, and my dad lived all the way in Texas. This meant I was staying in cars and garages. I was hitchhiking from downtown to Belmont Shores one day when I was given a ride by a man who was kind of strange. I wasn't too worried though. I was already a hard drug user at that age, and I had been arrested for 25 pounds of marijuana in Huntington Beach. I suppose that's another story altogether though. I was picked up by this dude, and as we drove down Ocean Boulevard, he turned and said to me, "Hey, I have to make a short detour and pick up some Valium." I said okay. We turned onto Coronado Street and drove a few blocks down it. He parked in front of this small apartment building and told me he'd be right back. I was waiting there in the car when he came out from the apartment. He said his cousin had locked the Valium in a safe and he had paged him. He was waiting for him to call with the combination. He asked me if I wanted to come up and smoke a joint. Of course, I said okay because I was a strong pothead at the time. I followed him upstairs and entered that apartment. I sat down on the couch. Immediately, I scanned the room for anything that could be a weapon because this man was acting very strangely, and Long Beach was full of strange people. I could see a pair of scissors and some other various stuff scattered all around. It was fairly clean though and well kept. As I was looking around though, he reached under the couch for what I thought must be some weed paraphernalia or something. "Hey, you ever see one of these?" I looked over to what was in his hand. It was a pair of flex cuffs. He told me I was going to try them on, and then he started to attack me. He grabbed my wrists and pulled out a can of mace. He sprayed me right in my eyes. He was able to get the zip tie around my wrists. Somehow I managed to pull one hand out as he tightened it. I jumped up as we were fighting and made my way over to the scissors. I grabbed them when he grabbed me in a bear hug from behind. I turned around and stabbed him in the face as he was trying to pin my arms down. I was fighting for my life now. I kept trying to stab him as hard as I could. His grip moved up and pinned my arms again, and he began to choke the life out of me from behind. I was not able to breathe anymore, and I thought I was going to die in that moment. So I went completely limp and acted like he had just killed me. The man dropped me to the floor and started to drag me to the bathroom by my arm. He opened the bathroom door and turned on the sink water. He just left me lying there. Immediately, I jumped onto the rim of the bathtub. He stuck his arm in the door holding out a towel. I was going to jump out the second-story window. When I saw his arm sticking out, I body blocked the door. He fell back and I jumped over him. I ran to the front door. When I got there, I saw to my horror that it was a key lock on the inside. I grabbed the doorknob and turned it. Luckily, it was unlocked and actually opened. I ran outside and began beating on every upstairs door of the apartment complex. It was like 12 units, so I kept on running, yelling for someone to call the police. I ran downstairs where there were two guys tossing a football in the street. They must have been freaked out, because here comes this random guy running up to them zip-tied. They asked me what the hell was going on, and I told them everything that happened. We could see the weirdo try to come out and flee. The guys helping me told the dude the cops were on the way, and he was not going anywhere. I heard sirens moments later, and 3 police cars came with lights and sirens blazing. The police asked me what happened, and I explained everything once again. They went up to his apartment and came down. They told me I had to go up with them. Of course, I didn't want to go back in there. The man, though, had told the police I had tried to rob him and stabbed him in the face for no reason. He said his side of the story. The police looked around and found some gay paraphernalia as well as the zip tie that was cut from my wrist. They took me outside and explained that because I was a juvenile, my parents would have to come to the station to press charges. They told me that if they arrested him, I would have to go also. I said I refused to press because I didn't want my parents involved. They left, and I went on my merry way. My mom got out of the feds eventually, and I moved back to Texas for 5 years. I came back, and my mom and sister had bought a house almost directly across the street from where I was attacked. When my sister said she wanted to introduce me to her new husband, well, I almost had a heart attack. It was one of the men who was tossing the football that day who had helped me. He seemed to recognize me and said he remembered me as the kid with the zip tie who had randomly run up to him that day. It was such a crazy story and crazy coincidence. I'm glad to know that he's doing well now, though. This one might not be quite what you're expecting, but it was a terrifying experience for everyone involved. I had missed this trip with my dad and his buddy who were going out hunting. They were in a remote section of southeastern Wyoming, hunting for elk that time. Like any good elk hunter, they were up at 3:30 to stake out their spot and watch the herd patterns before daylight. As they were driving in, though, a figure suddenly appeared in their headlights, and by the silhouette they could tell this was not a hunter. What was a lone person doing, walking down this road in complete darkness with no gear? My dad was driving, so he slowed down to a crawl in his truck. His buddy readied his sidearm. This had foul play written all over it, when they could distinguish the figure fully in the headlights. They saw it appeared to be a girl in a tank top and underwear only, wearing no shoes or anything else. They stopped and verbally checked her status from the window. They were suspecting there could have been somebody staked out in the sagebrush ready to ambush them. It became quickly clear, though, that she was severely hypothermic and bleeding profusely from her feet as well. He and his buddy hopped out of the truck and let her into the cab. From there, I suppose it had to have been a very terrifying experience for that girl. I know for sure I wouldn't want two middle-aged rednecks picking me up 40 miles away from any civilization. They cranked up the heat full blast and drove her to a nearby country gas station, where they were regular customers and friends with the owner and his wife, who happened to be a retired nurse. When the girl had finally recovered enough to articulate her words, she told them a horrifying story. She and her boyfriend had driven out there to drink and have sex. Well, when she suddenly started having a seizure during it, the man lost his temper, beat her up, grabbed her shoes, and threw them away into the brush. When she got out of the car to go find them, the man drove off, leaving her out there all alone in freezing temperatures in only her skivvies. She had walked 5 miles down a dirt road barefoot before my dad found her, and it's a good thing they did too, because she was very close to death when they did. This still creeps me out to this day. So I had very little to no supervision as a child. My mom worked day shifts, and my dad worked night shifts. Dad would be asleep most of the day, which meant I was really free to do whatever I wanted until Mom came home. Usually, though, I'd get bored after just a few hours spent watching TV and playing with my toys. Whenever that would happen, I would grab the home phone and retreat to my room. I used to find it so entertaining to just press random buttons and see who would pick up. Usually, I'd press too many of them, or occasionally I'd get a number right, and upon hearing my voice, the person on the other line would warn me to not call strangers again. I remember one particular time, though, I managed to call a correct number. A man with a deep, gravelly voice picked up. I asked for the man's name, and I could audibly hear him pause for a moment thinking it over. The man then told me he was Santa Claus. I was beyond excited. Of course, I was still young and gullible enough to believe this could be true. Well, of course, in my childlike excitement, A good 10 to 15 minutes were then spent bombarding the man with various questions. Everything seemed to be going fine, until Santa informed me that one of his elves had misplaced my address. Then he told me that I would not be getting any presents on Christmas if I didn't tell him where I lived. Luckily, I was young enough that I didn't know my own address at that age. I remember crying profusely, desperately trying to remember what our address was. Eventually, I got so upset I ran into my parents' bedroom and woke up my dad while shouting, "Santa needs our address!" My dad was pissed off. He yanked the phone out of my hands. But Santa was already long gone. Obviously, after this, my parents made sure I never touched the home phone by myself again. So I lived in a one-bedroom apartment. Connected to the bedroom was this walk-in closet. Now, my ex-boyfriend was staying with me at the time. During the middle of the night one day, I awoke from a loud sound that came from inside that closet. Instantly, I broke out into a sweat. I didn't move at all. I didn't do anything except stay underneath my blankets. I laid there with my eyes pressed as closed as possible, until eventually I fell back asleep out of fear. The next morning, I went into the closet and saw that one of the bags I had on a shelf had fallen over. "Ah, thank God that's it," I thought. I then proceeded to get ready for work as normal. That's when my ex came in and told me he had had a bad dream. I asked him what this bad dream was about. He told me it was about the closet. Okay, well that's a strange coincidence. What about the closet? I thought perhaps he had heard it too and it had affected his sleep possibly. But then what he said next freaked me the hell out. "Well, I thought I woke up in the middle of the night and saw you in the closet standing backwards." As if that wasn't scary enough, fast forward to a couple of years later. Nothing had happened since then, so I had completely forgotten about that incident. It was the same apartment complex, but in a different unit. I was living with my now current boyfriend. One day, he nonchalantly came up to me. "So, why were you standing in the closet last night? I woke up and I saw somebody standing in there." One, I never told my current boyfriend about the first closet story. And two, I don't sleepwalk either. I really have no idea what could be happening here. Does anybody have any suggestions possibly? Oh, and also, this all happened within the past 4 years.